All righty, welcome to Pequot Library's Meet the Author. I'm Caroline Crawford, and I'm so psyched to welcome you to this very, very special night. But before I get on to the good stuff, what we're here for, I really want to say thank you to our special friend, Dana McCreesh. Dana is Pequot Library's most voracious reader, literally. I mean, she shakes out more books than anyone. We're not sure how she can do it. She reads more books than most of us read all year. It's amazing. But Dana had read Jennifer Risher's book, We Need to Talk, A Memoir About Wealth. And she was so impressed and loved it so much. She emailed and called us and said, do you mind if I reach out to this author? And I was like, of course, that'd be amazing. You know, never thought we'd be so lucky. And 3 hours later, she's like, we got Jen Risher. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So anyway, Dana, this is all because of you. We appreciate you, and we're so psyched. We're beyond grateful for Jennifer Risher, Jen, as we call her, for joining us tonight from California. Jennifer's poignant and important memoir about wealth and her very personal experience about wealth is fascinating. And I think no matter where we are in the wealth spectrum, her stories are thought-provoking and really amazing conversation starters. Jennifer and her husband's lives changed dramatically the day they left Microsoft. And her memoir is a journey, which she so honestly shares with us. She and her husband are huge readers. And her husband, David, co-founded Worldreader with the mission of creating a world where everyone was a reader, which is so special. We love hearing about these amazing missions at Pequot Library. And the Rishers didn't let any time get behind them during COVID. And hopefully Jen will share with us what they did, but they inspired millions of friends to inspire lots of giving to nonprofits this last year. Joining Jen in conversation is our dear friend, Kelly Laferriere. Kelly is an amazing supporter of Pequot Library. She lives in Southport. She's a business and brand builder and is currently Chief Business Officer at A-Rod Corp. She lives down the street with her 3 amazing kids and her husband. And I was telling Jen that Kelly's kids are always helping out as much as Kelly does. We're so happy to welcome you all here tonight. I think everyone's on mute, so we can keep it that way. If you have any questions, you can put them on the side, which will be terrific. But after these amazing ladies finish their conversation, we will open up some questions from you guys. But welcome, Jen and Kelly, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And thank you, Dana and Kelly. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Caroline. Great intro, and we'll jump right in. Jennifer and Caroline and I were just chatting and saying how we wish that Jennifer could be at our beautiful and beloved library and just see what a crown jewel it is in our community and in such a unique place. So when she's back for a Connecticut College reunion, we're going to drag her down and go to the horseshoe, as Caroline said. Anyhow, all right, so the goal of this conversation with Jennifer is to really not only talk about her book, but think about the way that we talk about money and explore its impact on our identity and relationships. So with that, I'm going to jump right in, Jennifer. My first question is, can you tell us why you wrote the book?
Absolutely. And I'll start with a little bit of background because, 30 years ago when I was 25, I got really lucky. I joined Microsoft and I met my husband, David, and I got stock that ended up being worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. 6 years later, when David and I were married and expecting our first child, David took a job at a small unknown startup that was selling books on the internet called Amazon.com. We were in our early 30s, the company went public, and suddenly we had more money than we could wrap our heads around. Mm-hmm. And I want to say up front that money makes life easier. I'm very fortunate. But wealth surprised me. Having a lot of money doesn't look or feel like what Hollywood sells us. Wealth can be isolating, and I felt the impact as a parent, as a sister, as a friend. And as a daughter, it was painful to feel as though my parents disapproved of what we had. 8 out of 10 people with wealth grew up middle class or poor, and yet we're not talking about the emotional challenges. It might be hard to imagine wealth as a challenge that needs to be overcome, especially now when there's so much need in our country. I mean, COVID has spotlighted racial and economic inequality. I should pay more taxes. Minimum wage needs to be higher. We need a stronger social safety net. We need reparations. We need so many policy changes. But I think we need change at a personal level too. And I'm hoping to help move money out of the taboo category and out of the shame category and get us talking to each other. Because normally, if I have a problem or a question, I turn to my friends. If I want to figure out, should my 16-year-old have a curfew? I talk to everyone I know. I ask for their advice. I get their ideas. I hear different perspectives. And just talking is helpful because it lets me know that my question is normal, that it's valid, and that it's shared. But the same doesn't happen with money. So I couldn't turn to friends to talk about having a lot of it. So I ended up looking for books, but there were no books. So I wrote my book, a book that I needed to read. And, my story is one I'd want to know about if it hadn't happened to me. And I also wrote my book for the millions of Americans like me who have more money than they had growing up. Or they have more money than many in their extended family, or maybe they have more money than many of their friends. I'm sharing my story as a way to help other people understand their own. And my goal is not to be prescriptive. I'm not going to show you how to do rich right. I don't have the answer for that. But I'm offering up a story that hasn't been told, one that examines things like how tricky it can be to navigate a vacation with another family that doesn't share your resources, or how painful it is to feel a friend's jealousy and feel as though you can't share what's really going on in your life. I hope to demystify wealth and validate these experiences, but I really also hope to get us talking, because the more I talk about money, the more I realize it's not money that we don't talk about, it's the emotions behind the money. And these emotions are universal. It doesn't really matter how much is in your bank account. If you have a parent or sibling, partner, friends, you probably know money's uncomfortable to talk about. We have a lot of fear around it. We're afraid of rejection. We're afraid of hurting people's feelings. We're afraid of, we won't measure up, or we'll sound unknowledgeable. We all have money shame, and we all have a money story that starts in our childhood.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the word shame, because I read that people would rather talk about their weight than money. And why do you think it's such a taboo subject?
I think it's, part of our history. It sort of came over on the Mayflower, I think, with the British aristocracy and landowners. I mean, that was not appropriate to talk about money. And we so we brought that over from Britain. And, as settlers, it was hard work, and it was, simple life. But I really think it's about, we're all equal, and that idea of being a country of equals. And I think it's why so many people identify as middle class, because we want to be equal. We want to be together in community. And so on each ends of the spectrum, if you have too little, there's shame. There's that word again, and there's shame at the top. So it kind of comes with our history. But I do think it's very important to talk about, not only as ways for us to connect with each other as individuals, to connect, but also to learn from each other. Like I was saying about, if I want to figure out if our kids should have a curfew, that's how I learn, is by talking to other people. But then I think it's also important to talk at a bigger scale. It's important for our society. There's so much need right now in our country, with people going without housing, without healthcare, without food. I mean, there's an education crisis. There's so much need, and it might sound far reaching, but I do feel like having these conversations that aren't being had will help us fight income inequality, because our silence has a lot of power. Our silence just keeps the status quo in place. It keeps us from examining our own relationship with money. It allows us to sort of stay in our bubble and unaware of our own privilege and not examining that. And it keeps stereotypes alive. And I think we have such a narrow and incomplete view of wealth. We see the glitz and the glamour, we see the corruption and the greed. You know, we know the Kardashians and the Real Housewives, and we've heard about Jeffrey Epstein, and we know about the parents who illegally tried to get their unqualified kids into top schools. But we're seeing the highly visible wealth and the stereotypes. And like I said earlier, 8 out of 10 people with wealth grew up middle class or poor. So, you know, they are you and they're hidden in plain sight, so much more ordinary and so much more diverse than what we see in the movies and on TV. And I think the other problem with that, the stereotypes and the lack of actually talking about wealth is that, you know, how many people have, you know, dreamed of what would I do if I had $1 million? You know, I remember in high school talking to my best friend, like, what would you do? You know, of course, at the time I'd have a cute boyfriend and a fancy car, but I really did think that all that money would change everything, that my life would be perfect. And I think we often set ourselves up this way, especially around money, thinking if only then my life would be perfect. If only I could get that big promotion. Or we do it around other things too. If only I could lose 20 pounds, or if only I met the right person, then my life would be perfect. You know, a friend of mine said she used to lie in bed at night, unable to sleep, thinking if only I could make $100,000. And then she started laughing because she was making a lot more than that, but she was still lying in bed at night, unable to sleep. And, you know, I had this if only happen, but I'm still me. You know, I still have insecurities. My feelings get hurt. I still make mistakes. And I'm not in a fantasy land.
So the name of your book is We Need to Talk, a memoir about wealth. What is wealth in your mind?
It's very relative and it changes very easily. So I think, like I said before, sort of like, I think it's, you know, having more than you used to have can feel like wealth. There's always more, there's always less. So I think that the idea of what is wealth, what is enough can be very elusive. And I think it's not a good place to end up if you're always looking for more. And for me, I found that, you know, it's almost a conscious decision of feeling the abundance in my life. And I know my mind knows that I have enough. But there are moments when I look around and I feel a panic in my gut, or I worry, or I start comparing myself. And then I have to remind myself, okay, what is enough? And I think it's important for people to really think that through and think, what is enough for me? What do I value in my life? So wealth, I think to lead a wealthy life doesn't really have to do with numbers and amounts or zeros. It's feeling wealth and abundance from within, but also kind of recognizing kind of what you have in your life.
Mm-hmm. So in your book, you said, after growing up middle class with middle class values, saving my pennies and being wary of the rich, I was embarrassed to join their ranks. How do you feel now?
Well, after writing a book for many, many years and going through that sort of therapy, I've outed myself. And I think because I think it's so important for us to shine a light on this reality and talk to each other. So I feel a lot better. But you know, back when, right before we had our daughter and when Amazon went public, you know, this curtain lifted as I became a new parent. And wow, it was amazing to have a daughter. And I joined a mother's group, and it was so connecting to talk with other women about the experience. And, you know, were we going to let our babies cry it out? Or were we going to use a pacifier? Or were we going to use a family bed? There were so many things that we had in common and so many things to share. And I felt so connected as a mom. And at the same time, this other curtain had lifted and we had all this money, and it was really a silent, you know, lonely space. And for many years, I kept what we had hidden in the name of being connected. And I think we do this to ourselves. I didn't want to share because I didn't think people would understand. I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want to sound ungrateful. And so I didn't talk. So there were many years, and that, to try and hide the reality of your life is exhausting. It's not a great place to be. And so it's, stepping into that space of living my truth, and then, hopefully helping other people kind of get there sooner than I did. So right now it feels really good to be out and talking to people and sharing, my experience as a way to let other people know that they're not alone, and that these experiences are common and shared.
Yeah, that's helpful. So what would you say is one step that we could do, the folks in this Zoom, to shake up the status quo as it relates to money? One step that could, change preconceived notions around how we talk about it. What would you recommend?
Well, it's having those, there's probably some awkward money situation in your life, or, when that awkward money moment kind of comes up, I recommend stepping into it instead of avoiding it. We do this thing to, we kind of make assumptions and tell ourselves stories rather than actually having a direct conversation. And let me just share a story as an example. A good friend of mine who's, middle class, she told me that, she and her husband drove the same car for many, many years. And she said, when that thing finally broke down, I bought an Audi Q5. And she'd always wanted that car. She was really excited to have the car. But then she was thinking about visiting her sister. And as she imagined driving up in the car, she started to worry about being judged. In her mind, she heard her sister saying, "Ooh, aren't we fancy?" And then in her mind, she started to justify the car. Well, it was used, it wasn't that expensive. So even before she saw her sister, she was making assumptions and telling herself stories. So what if she'd actually talked to her sister? When we don't talk about something, it tends to loom large and take on a life of its own. And I just want to encourage us to have those conversations. It's not comfortable because we don't have practice and we don't have experience. But let me walk you through maybe some steps you could take to have a conversation that maybe you're not having right now. So, there's all sorts of situations where this could come up. Let's say you have a friend who's, every time you go out, they always want to go to a really expensive restaurant that you really can't afford. Or your mom says, "Oh, you're going on vacation again? Can you afford that?" Or your daughter buys this expensive handbag that really doesn't fit your values or her budget. Or your in-laws are giving money and gifts to your spouse's siblings, but not to you. Or you go out with a couple and every time you get together, they're always talking about all these exotic vacations that they're taking, and it's just, you can't afford them. And so all these situations can be awkward. But I think we should kind of start talking to each other about them and addressing them as a way to connect and get through that awkward situation. So I think it starts really with figuring out because money is very emotional. Figuring out, what is the emotion that's coming up for me? So take the example of you're going out with a friend who always wants to go to these expensive restaurants. What emotions coming up? Are you resentful? Are you, no, actually you feel a little ashamed because you have a good job. I mean, you should be able to pay for these restaurants, but really it doesn't work. So you realize, okay, I feel ashamed that I can't afford these places. So know that, understand kind of what you're feeling. And then set up a time to talk, a time where it's kind of emotionally neutral, where you actually have time. And I think this is a really important step. When you start that conversation, acknowledge that it's an uncomfortable one. We don't know what we're doing. I mean, give yourself and your friend permission to fumble around, to get it wrong, and to not, we're not going to do it perfectly because we don't have experience. So set up that safe space to have this awkward, uncomfortable conversation. And then, really spend time listening. So maybe you talk for 5 minutes, share what you're feeling, and then let your friend talk for 5 minutes and share what she's feeling. I mean, who knows? We have these stories that we tell ourselves. Maybe your friend will say, I had no idea. You come as my guest, let me treat you to dinner. Or maybe she says, I don't care where we eat. Why don't we eat somewhere cheaper? It doesn't matter to me. I just want to be with you. Or maybe she says, oh my gosh, thank you so much for saying something. I'm in a lot of debt. I shouldn't really be going to those restaurants either. I mean, once you kind of break the barrier, you can really have a conversation. And from experience, on the other side of those type of conversations is really a chance to connect, a sense of relief. And then you kind of put money in its place. Once you're connected as two people, you can talk about money in the way that, I mean, it's a tool that we have at our disposal. So then it's sort of sharing gratitude with each other about having that conversation. And I can share, I mean, from personal experience, there's money has created a lot of distance in relationships until I've kind of addressed it. So I'll tell you a story about my brother. I have a brother who's 2 years younger than me, and when he graduated from college, he went into the Peace Corps. And then he got a master's in Spanish and became a high school Spanish teacher. And this is many years ago. He wanted to buy a house. And so he was kind of looking around for a house, and David and I offered him $20,000 towards his down payment. But he refused our gift. He said he wanted to live within his own means. And at the time, that refusal hurt my feelings. I felt as though he were looking down at our money. It hurt but I didn't say anything. And then, after a few years, he got married, and David and I sent a check as a wedding gift. And this time he accepted it. And when his first child was born, we again sent money, and he and his wife thanked us. And we began to write a check every year and send him money every year. And over the course of many years, he stopped sort of acknowledging our gifts. So I'd write a check in December and I'd hear only silence, like the money was disappearing into a void. And I began to feel resentful, and I felt taken for granted. But I didn't say anything. Instead, I did that. I made up stories in my head about what was going on. I thought, well, he's embarrassed. Or I thought, he thinks we have so much money, it's meaningless to us. So it doesn't, it doesn't mean anything to us. And then, I'm not proud to admit this, but just a couple of years ago, I just didn't send a check. And later in January, when we were communicating over email, he ended one of his notes to me saying, I wonder if a certain year-end check is just late in the mail. Is it? And I saw that. It made me angry. It was shocking. And of course, I knew we had to talk. I mean, here I was writing a book about talking about money. And it wasn't easy. I had to really sit down and think about what I felt, what my intentions were. And then we got on the phone, and I told him, my feelings are hurt that you have not thanked us for our gifts. And he apologized right away. He said he hadn't realized, and that he thought it was easier and more comfortable for me if he didn't make a big deal of the money, which completely made sense given how we grew up. And then we really started to have a conversation. And at that point, as two people who love and trust each other, we put money in its place, not as something that's bigger than the two of us, but as a tool. And then once we were connected, we could talk about it. He said, I don't care, I don't need this money, but it's really nice to have, and I really appreciate it. And I'd never asked him, and I didn't care what he was doing with it, but I wanted to know. I wanted to be part of his life. So that conversation was really powerful, and it showed me just how powerful it is, and how we're all missing out when we avoid talking about money.
Yeah, that's such a great example. So as you think of your own experience outside of talking about it, is there any other advice you would give to somebody who has come into wealth?
Well, I would say immediately, start talking. Don't shy away from it. I would love to have, wealth advisors or financial advisors kind of help people through this this period of time when people do, there's a lot, I mean, in California, so there's all this sort of new money being created. And I feel for those people because it isn't what we all kind of see in Hollywood. And so I'd love to have wealth advisors kind of connect people and have them have conversations that they aren't having right now. I mean, I wish I had the courage to talk to the women in my mother's group about what was going on in my life and to talk about how odd it was and how strange it was. If I had done that, I think it would have been, I would have felt connected to people. So I think it's really important to have those conversations. And I think that's why I wrote the book, really, as a catalyst to have those types of conversations and to realize that you're not alone. And you know, when I was writing the book, towards the end, I thought, okay, I really want to include different voices and different perspectives. And so I thought I'll interview some women and include their voices. And even then it was like, ugh, how can I ask someone to talk to me about wealth? And I was very nervous. And I just started by sending a couple of emails to just a couple of acquaintances, asking them if they'd talk with me. And, you know, the response was amazing. You know, you open that door and, you know, people wrote me back right away saying, oh my gosh, I think about these things all the time, but I never talk about them. And then when we got together and we were talking about our children and our parents, and we had a lot in common, we weren't alone. And so I think kind of just having that experience of talking to someone else who's going through some similar issues is very powerful.
Yeah. Super helpful. So I'm going to pivot to philanthropy. And in the book, you say philanthropy isn't as straightforward as just writing a check. And as Caroline referenced, your husband started a nonprofit called Worldreader.org. And then you made the decision to start a nonprofit during COVID and raised over $8 million. Super impressive. What lessons do you both hope to impart in doing this work?
Well, let me back way up because I think, you know, we all, like I said earlier, we all have a money story, and it starts when we're young and we start to learn our attitudes and habits around money as kids. And that's when we learn about giving, or we don't learn about giving as kids. And for me, you know, my mom and I took canned peaches to food drives and we took clothes to the Goodwill, but my dad sort of had the attitude of, you know, that charity was for chumps sort of feeling. And when we were out and we saw someone asking for money, it was sort of like, oh, that person's trying to take advantage of us. So that's where I started from. And it really wasn't until I got to Microsoft and I was surrounded by peers who were making charitable donations that I gave a small percentage of my paycheck to the United Way. And I gave $1,000 to Planned Parenthood because they've been helpful to me. And, you know, that's when I just started to learn about giving and philanthropy. And this is all to say that it is an evolution. You know, kind of my next step was really giving back to places that had given to me. We gave to NPR, we gave to my mother's group. It was organized by a nonprofit. And then our kids entered an independent school, and that's a world in and of itself, a foreign world to me with a foreign language. I mean, suddenly I was learning about development and fundraising and asks and stewardship and capital campaigns and endowments. I mean, these are words I didn't know anything about. So that was all a learning for me. And yeah, at that point, I think our financial advisor suggested we put money into a donor advised fund. And, you know, we had little kids, we put that money aside. So a donor advised fund is just a charitable vehicle. Basically, if you want to set some money aside for charity, or maybe if you have some taxable event in your year, your advisor might say, put some money away, or you get a windfall. So people put money into these donor advised funds. And we did that really early on. And at that point for me, it was like, okay, I realized, oh, giving the money away isn't the hardest part. Letting go of that money wasn't that hard. It was trying to figure out where to give. And I felt like I had to do it right. I had to do it perfectly. I had to have a philanthropic strategy and do all the research. And it was really overwhelming. And I spent time in that space. And I think a lot of people get stuck there, worried about, getting it wrong and therefore not doing anything. And I've learned more about that. But there was a period of time when I was kind of in that space myself. But fast forward to now, and actually to last year and to COVID, and my husband started a nonprofit himself, over 10 years ago. So, when COVID hit, and it was March, April, and we were just seeing all the need out in our community and in the world, in our country, our hearts are going out to nonprofits because they had more work than ever. They were trying to figure out how to kind of pivot and kind of get their work done. At the same time, all the funding was drying up. This is when the stock market was crashing and individuals were kind of pulling back. And I mean, David felt it as a nonprofit fundraiser, like the foundations that had kind of suggested that they would be giving to him kind of said, no, we won't be. And so he was feeling it and we were feeling it. And I kind of doubled down already to places I already supported, but we wanted to do more. And we thought, let's just give to nonprofits. But then we were also very aware of this phenomenon that's happened with donor advised funds. So when we opened ours, it was really kind of for people who had a lot of means, but there are now over 870,000 donor advised accounts in the country. More and more people have opened these DAFs, and there's so much money stuck in the DAFs. So it's really easy to move money into a DAF, especially since you get that tax break up front, but there's nothing that's kind of helping you push the money through. There's no payout requirement. There's no one who's kind of giving you that nudge to move your money. And so it's stuck. And actually there's $140 billion stuck in donor advised funds. That's a crime. So we thought, how are we going to help move that money through? And how are we going to incent people to give now when there's, this is the rainy day, we need to be giving. And so we put up $1 million and we ask people to make the commitment to half their DAF, spend down half of the money that's in their donor advised fund by September of last year and start giving. And we didn't put any requirements on the giving. Give wherever you want. Our real goal was to inspire giving, and we'd match wherever you gave, with the exception of anything that promoted violence or hate crime or gun violence. So we didn't give to any organization that supported those things, but anything else. And so we started in May. And we actually had a couple of people join us on the giving pool side. We had 2 couples join and another woman from her foundation. So we ended up having $1.4 million in potential matching grants, dollar for dollar matching grants up to $10,000, and then a couple at $25,000. And people joined us and they started giving. And in the middle of July, we matched grants, and we did it randomly, put it into a spreadsheet and just matched grants. And then we did again in the end of September. And in 5 months, we moved a total of $8.6 million out of DAFs and 2 nonprofits, which is a huge win and very exciting. But I think even a bigger win is the conversation it started. We got a lot of press. We were in the Washington Post, we were in the Bloomberg, people were interested. And, so it started a very large conversation. I mean, there's a lot of issues around DAFs and policies around DAFs. And then we started conversations within families. Donors told us, we're sitting around the dinner table, having conversations with our adult kids that we would never have otherwise been having about money, about our values, about where we want to give. And it's started conversations with nonprofits and donors. We found that, we thought maybe the big national sponsors, DAF sponsors like Fidelity and Schwab and Vanguard would partner with us to help move this money, but they make money on that money. So they weren't our partners. And we talked to community foundations that give more locally. Some people a little bit, but that structure is also, I think, a little broken. And it really was the nonprofits that became, our sales force and it was such a win-win because it gave them the chance to talk to their donors, to ask, do you have a donor advised fund, to share what they were doing and what they were working on. And because it's, I think philanthropy is best when it's not transactional, but it's a relationship. And, you're in relationship with someone who cares about the same thing you do. One person's doing the work, one person has the money, and you come together in partnership. So it really helped build partnership between donors and nonprofits. And so many donors said, this was the nudge I needed. So I could talk about, I could go on and on about Half My DAF, and it has been really, my husband and I kind of came up with the idea, and I thought, oh, can I really do this? How are we going to work together? And that has been a really fun and nice experience as well, like doing this together. And, we initially just thought this was a one-time thing, but it's been so successful. We're doing it again this year. And I'd love anyone out there who has a donor advised fund who wants to make a difference now and give now, please join us. So this year we have $3 million to give away. All the people that joined us last year clearly had a good experience, clearly felt their money was doing good in the world. So they came back and they joined us at higher levels. And my husband and I got the most amazing Christmas gift this year because our daughters met with each other, they met with our financial advisor, and they gave us the gift of joining us with Half My DAF. So they had an opinion. Our older daughter wanted her money to go towards racial justice issues, and our younger daughter wants her money to go towards environment and climate. So this year we're offering the same kind of general fund, give wherever you want, and we'll match those. But we also have some specialty funds that are aligned with our values. So racial justice and climate and education in underserved communities, and then reproductive health. So it's very exciting. And we launched this in the beginning of February, and you have until September 30th to half your DAF and join us and help get the library, give the library a chance to get a matching grant from Half My DAF.
That's awesome. We'll make sure the group here receives that information. So anyone who wants to participate can, and hats off to you and your husband for the creativity and seeing that vision through. That's really, really admirable. Your former boss at Microsoft, Melinda Gates, how has she impacted you, and particularly in this area?
Oh, she's so my idol. I just think she was such a real and authentic person when I knew her. And, I've watched her in the world, and she's just done such amazing things in the world of philanthropy and to lift women, and her voice, Moment of Lift, is an incredible book. I see her as such a role model and for women because, I think, there was an article a couple weeks ago in the New York Times about women philanthropy, and we've been leading behind the scenes for a long time in many ways. And research shows that women are the ones that kind of are driving the giving, and that we do it in community. And I see her out there, Melinda Gates, and then Mackenzie Scott and Priscilla Chan, and these women really stepping into leadership roles in philanthropy, which is really amazing and wonderful. And which makes me think, I think women, I'm going to go on my women campaign now, because I think women are the ones that can really make a difference in having these types of conversations. First of all, we need to have these conversations because that's the way we kind of gather information, but it's also the way we're going to demand equity in the workforce and in other places. But I think we can be leaders in conversations in our families, within our communities. We don't shy away from emotions. Men tend to have their identity and ego more wrapped up in money. And I think we can drive these conversations that are so important for us to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, my last question, and then we'll open it up to the group. Caroline, does that sound good? Okay. How have you tried to make your own children stay motivated and not feel entitled?
This is, the number one question for people who have more money than they had growing up, and they worry about their kids. But we all worry about our kids. I think no one wants to raise a spoiled brat. when I think about this, I really think stereotypes are not serving us. I think we all have this huge myth in our heads about the spoiled rich kid. It's so powerful and it's so strong and it's so with us. And I don't think it exists. I bought into it for way too many years. I spent way too much time worrying. But you can spoil kids can get spoiled at any level of society. I think, yes, wealth does add this layer, but in the end, it really comes down to your values. And it's not a conversation about your values, it's living your values. And it's living your values day to day, week to week, year to year. Your kids are watching you. They see you. They see how you move through the world. And this is, at the daily level. Like if you go to the grocery store with your kids and you're driving up and someone cuts you off and takes your parking spot, what do? Do you feel entitled? Are you yelling? Like, how are you acting in that situation? Because your kids are watching you. And then when you go into the grocery store, this is sort of a teachable moment. Are you just taking everything off the shelf? Do you pay whatever? Or are you showing them, okay, this is how much you're paying per ounce for this can, or this, and this is how much you're paying for this. It's a teachable moment there. So they're watching that experience too. And they see you as you walk up to the meat counter and you're interacting with the guy behind the counter. Are you respectful? Are you courteous? I mean, they're watching that too. And when you're checking out, and then when you take your groceries to the car, do you return the cart? I mean, all these pieces, I think, are part of, what we're teaching our kids. And that includes conversations around the dinner table. How do you talk about your day? What are you proud of? What do you prioritize in your life? So I think those things are really important. And, we've had so much privilege. We've done a lot of traveling. And when we do, I think we try and show our daughters and because we care about it ourselves, understanding other cultures and immersing in those cultures. So it's walking through the streets, getting on a local bus. And when we went to China for some time, and we volunteered while we were there, and we lived in a dorm and taught English at a preschool. So every morning we got up and we went to a preschool and taught English together as a family. Those types of experiences, I think, will stay with our kids, and they've seen a piece of the world. We helped a family purchase a house in Vietnam, and we went to visit that family and we helped paint the trim. So they've had those, they are privileged experiences, but they also showed them the world. I think it's also, as our kids get older, we always told our kids, you're very fortunate. They've always known that, and it's about attitude and gratitude as well. So they've kind of lived with that, because I feel very grateful. And then there's that moment of overwhelm where I feel like I don't know what I'm doing again. And that happened when our oldest daughter was going to college. I felt like we need to tell them more about kind of our situation. And here again, I hadn't ever talked to anyone about that. So it felt very overwhelming. And what was I going to do? How are we going to talk about this with our daughter? And I was writing the book, and we thought, well, let's just ask some other couples what they've done. And here again, we sent out these emails to several other couples, and the door was open and they jumped in. I mean, really, literally, people were like, yeah, let's get together. Let's have a dinner. So we had dinner with a couple of different couples and just talked about how we were thinking about our kids, how we were thinking about money in our kids. One couple had 3 kids that were kind of out of the house, and they'd spent a lot of time thinking about housing, and they kind of approached it for housing, and they thought, well, maybe we tailor our gifts to each of our kids. And then they decided, no, they're going to give each of their children, a same lump sum of money. And one of their kids bought a big house. One of them bought a smaller house and put money in the bank. The other hadn't yet kind of purchased a home. But just hearing other people's approaches was so helpful, and it allowed us to kind of pick and choose. It normalized, and it kind of empowered us to have a conversation that ended up being really amazing with our daughters. One of the couples told us how they had talked to their daughters or their kids about putting money aside for college, and that's how college was being paid for. And that they had put money aside in a trust as well. And so we kind of use that format with our daughters to kind of start that conversation about, how we were paying for college and how, if they wanted to go on and get a master's or get more education, that there is a pot of money there for them to use. So that's how we had that first conversation. So I do think conversation is important with our kids as well. But it has to come from a understanding. And so it starts with conversation with your peers.
Yeah, those are great examples. I'm definitely going to make sure I put the grocery cart back. All right, Caroline, that's my list. Do you want to open it up to the group?
I love attitude and gratitude, Jen. That's amazing. This has been just really enlightening. Such great conversations. Does anyone have any questions for Jen? I see that Dana had a question about travel, but she felt like it was answered, just about how you share stories with your early trips where you spent an extra day of your vacation time just to save $50. Are you still doing those kind of things? Do you still?
I sometimes still have to remind myself, it's okay. I can spend them. No, those things that you learn in childhood are really, you don't escape them really. They're still with you. And so I sometimes have to remind myself, no, it's okay. You can get dessert or whatever it is. Yeah.
So funny. That's great. Let me see if there's any more questions down here. Here we go. What do you think are the 3 to 4 main issues that someone should consider before setting up a donor advised fund? How did you decide where to park your DEF? How do you decide?
Yeah, I'm actually in shopping around for a new donor advised fund now. We've had our donor advised fund with Fidelity for a long time. And now that we've been doing this work, I realize, I don't want to give my money to Fidelity anymore because 2 reasons. One, they do nothing to help people move their money through. And I think that's not good. And 2, they also are supporting organizations that support violence and racial discrimination. And so they're allowing money from their fund or from their DAF to go out. They're not being transparent with those. And there are DAFs out there, Amalgamated, Tides. There are many, many DAFs out there that are kind of more focused on equity or focused on kind of transparency, and they won't fund things that they don't believe in. So it's shopping around for that, for a donor advised fund that you feel good about, I think is important. I mean, don't spend so much time. I think people can get wrapped, you kind of can get to analysis paralysis. So make it happen. And I do think I have nothing against donor advised funds. I think they're a great mechanism for giving because it does give you that time to think. You can put your money in but make sure that you're moving it out as well. That's a key piece. So what you said, there are 4 questions.
The 3 to 4 main issues that someone should consider.
Yeah, I think it comes down to what you value, really. I mean, you can put your money in a community foundation. They have DAFs. There's 3 types of DAFs, these big national DAFs, and then community foundations that kind of focus more locally. And then there's single purpose DAFs, like religious DAFs or educational DAFs, Jewish Federation or the Stanford University has a DAF. So think about what you value and kind of, how you want to give, and maybe that'll kind of help you figure out which place you want to open your DAF.
Thank you. I have a question from the fundraising side of things. Like when you're at an event, or you're walking around town and you see someone coming towards you, are you like, oh gosh, here comes so-and-so, they're going to hit me up further, whatever? Like, do you feel that coming? Like, what's it like being on your side of that equation?
That's what people always think. Oh, you must get asked all the time. And I don't feel that's actually that true. And, I can say no, and that's okay. Ask me. That's your job. You should ask me. And that gives me the opportunity to have a conversation with you. And often I'll say yes, because, I think it depends on what you're asking for. I mean, there's some things that I gravitate towards and some things that I don't. And I'm really kind of focused on equity and community. So if it doesn't kind of fit in kind of what I care about, that's one thing, but have a conversation with me. And I don't mind people asking me. I think, it's funny, David feels a little bit like that because he's a fundraiser for Worldreader. His nonprofit gets digital books into the hands of kids in the developing world. And he's in Ghana and Kenya. He's in Jordan, working with Syrian refugees there, and in India, helping kids get access to books. And he works with local publishers and local authors so that kids are reading about themselves, not about Americans. And now, actually, with the education crisis going on here in this country, he's coming to the United States. He's partnering with a couple of different people and kind of bringing his program to Appalachia and to Oakland and a place outside of Seattle. But he feels, I think, that same feeling you do there, that he's, people can see him coming ready to ask for money for Worldreader. Yeah, it's something that exists out there, and I think have a little humor around it.
Totally. I think I mentioned when we were speaking earlier that we have a huge book sale in the summer. And because of COVID, we've had a lot of donations that we haven't been able to do. Like, it's nonstop. We have so many books. I mean, does your husband have any good tips on where we've reached out to our community? We've been donating a lot of books to our community partners, but I would love to, pick your husband's brain about what to do with excessive books. We want to put them in the hands of people who really want them and need them. And if he has any tips, I'm all ears. I would love that.
Yeah. He's done all his digitally, so it's all digital. So
Okay.
that's one of the, and that's kind of helped with, getting kids books in sub-Saharan Africa, because what he found was all those books that you're probably, was shipping off, he saw kids reading, the history of Utah or the, Encyclopedia Britannica. They weren't getting books that really that they cared about, that were kind of excited them to read. So yeah, he thought go digital.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
We have a question. How transparent with your adult children about your size of wealth and your long-term intentions for inheritance, giving, spending?
I talked to a woman who's like a 5th generation wealth holder, and she really inspired me because she said, in her family, she was one of 5. She had 4 brothers, and it was a family business. And she felt like her voice was never heard, and how, it was expected that the boys would go into the business. And talking to people of wealth, it made me realize how important it is to listen to our daughters as a generation, and to have that a real communication, a real kind of conversation between us as parents and them as the next generation. And it made me think, I want to be more transparent overall. And there's no reason, this whole spoiled rich kid, it hasn't happened. And I look at our daughters and I'm proud of who they are and who they're becoming. And I feel like it's important for me to say that and to tell them, I'm no longer afraid of you being spoiled and entitled. You're making your way in the world, and you're beautiful women. And so that conversation was important, but also, do you want to know how much is in your trust? And we had that conversation with our daughters this summer. And we set it up, one of them was on the other side of the country, and one of them was in our house. So we had her go upstairs and Zoom in from upstairs, and my husband and I met, and we had a really kind of formal conversation about, do you want to know? And that was a very interesting conversation, because initially they didn't want to know. And we spent about a half an hour talking about that. And, our older daughter was feeling like, it's one thing to know that we are very fortunate and that, I'm taken care of. It's another thing to know the specifics, because it feels like a lot of responsibility. And so we kind of put it in their court. Do you want to know? And in the end, they did. And we told them a number, and then we gave them an assignment. Now you two have to talk to each other about this. Talk about how you're feeling about it. What's coming up for you? And then we're going to re-meet and talk about it again. So it's an ongoing conversation, and it's ongoing. And I'm kind of new to the process, how I think we kind of come together with our values, because that generation does have different ideas about how they want to do things. And I think that kind of, came about with Half My Daff. They loved the idea of Half My Daff. Our younger daughter was home with us during the summer and was kind of entering data into the database about the nonprofits. So she was really involved. She was seeing it. She kind of got it, but she wanted to add her layer to it. Like, I want to give to climate and environment. So we listened to that and we incorporated it. So I think that's important.
I'm curious, do you feel like that impacted their own motivation in the world?
I think it did. I mean, I think I love that we're doing this as it's kind of come about as we're doing it as a family. Like, I'm working with my husband on this, and our younger daughter was working on it this summer. And then we knew we had to hire someone because it's actually quite a bit of work. And we were talking about hiring someone. Our older daughter said, I'll do it. I'll be the person who's entering and gave them these forms together. And so now she's involved in it too. And I think it is teaching them. I think, with philanthropy, it's a muscle. It's muscle you have to start building. So I'm really excited that they're starting to build that and think about it now, because it does take time to understand, how to do it, how to think about it, what you care about. So yeah, I think they're in this process of learning. Of course, they've watched us all along. They've watched my husband spend all his time working in Worldreader and thinking about serving kids in the developing world. So that's a piece of it as well.
One last question, Jen, from Dana. Do you tie any conditions to your trust for your kids?
No. We have not. We have a trustee, so there's someone kind of a gatekeeper. And, honestly, I am not worried about, I'm actually have the opposite worry of like I tell our younger daughter was very interested in earning her own money in high school. And she started working as a junior in high school, and she worked after school. She worked on weekends. She worked at a clothing store. She loves fashion. And she worked nonstop basically. And then every summer she has worked, and she's, saving and saving and saving, and we'll go shopping together, and she'll be so excited about this dress she's found, but doesn't want to buy it. So I'm really trying to encourage her to spend and so I have no worry that they are going to use it irresponsibly, or that my worry is like that my hope is that it's not a burden, and it's something that is a positive in their life. But at this point, no, we don't have any sort of, and maybe we should. I don't know.
They sound like great kids. They sound like terrific ladies. Well, thank you so much. On behalf of Stephanie Coakley, our executive director, and the staff and our community, this has been so amazing. Jen Risher, We Need to Talk, A Memoir About Wealth, and Kelly Laferriere, our neighbor and terrific friend. And I think Kelly wanted to end it with a great quote, if you will, Kelly. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah. In doing my homework, I came across a review your husband wrote on Good Books. And he said, I appreciate her willingness to share her journey. Hopefully the result is that we're all more able to talk and connect. And I think our conversation did just that today. And we are super appreciative, Jennifer. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly. Come see us in Southport. We'll show you.
I would love to do that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us.